Welcome to Make a Difference Monday, where we encourage you to make a difference in yourself and others and the world. I'm Steve Bullard. I'm CFO and co-founder of the Pearl House. Today, we're joined by Ryan Abernathy, and we're going to talk about dreaming from the ground up. Ryan and I have known each other since college, which is just a few short years ago for us. And we've been really close, best friends ever since. And so this is our first time to ever talk via Zoom. Ryan, how you doing today?
Hey, bro, I'm good, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Sure, man, no problem. So like Steve said, my name is Ryan Abernathy. I'm the teaching pastor at West Metro Community Church in Yukon, Oklahoma. And I also have the privilege of serving as the senior director for childhood hunger at the regional food bank in Oklahoma City. We serve 53 of Oklahoma's 77 counties. And so I oversee all of the different projects and things there. But West Metro is the place that is my church. God gave me the ability to start that about 16 years ago along with my wife. I'm married, been married to my wife for 23 years. I'll actually be 24 this summer. Her name is Amanda, and we've got 4 girls. My oldest is Annalise. She's a freshman at OSU, go Pokes. And then I've got a 15-year-old, Mia Kate, that is a freshman in high school. Ella Claire is 12, and she's a 7th grader. And then our youngest, Livy Joy, who we adopted, she is 5. In fact, she turned 5 this week, bro. And all my younger girls go to Bethany public schools. So yeah, hanging out here in Oklahoma City, man.
So talk to me about your church. Obviously, this is a thing you started 16 years ago, so I'm sure it's had lots of ups and downs. Just tell us how that, because, starting a church isn't always the best idea. It's not always
a terrible idea.
Not an
Highly
easy road.
Do not encourage.
So how did that come to be? And, how'd you get started in that?
So, man, I was in youth ministry for 11 years in Texas and in Oklahoma. And over the course of that, my wife and I really started to see kind of the culture shifting and changing, less and less churched people. We were at a traditional church, but we reached really non-traditional kids, kids from really screwed up backgrounds, kids who were 2nd and 3rd generation unchurched. And we were seeing them come to the Lord. But the problem was they would come to Jesus. Their parents would come to visit, see them get baptized. And then their parents sometimes would come to visit the church, and they just did not fit. I mean, they had no clue how to act. People kept talking to me about teaching these people church manners, and I kid you not, that was said to me multiple times. I actually had a guy leave the church because a kid wore a hat in a church service and drank a Slurpee. So it was a mess, man. And so my wife and I started talking about how we would combat that. And I fully blame James Langford for this. He and I would have breakfast together and talk, and he kept telling me, I'd lay out my litany of complaints, and he'd be like, everybody I've talked to who's got your complaints are planting churches, Ryan. That's what you ought to do. And I was like, Lang, man, I can't do that. My wife will kill me. And I would tell her that. She was like, no. And then one time I went and had lunch with him or breakfast with him, and I'm driving back to the church. I called Amanda, and she's like, what'd he say? And I said, the same thing he says every time. We ought to be planting a church. And her response was, okay. And I'm looking at my phone, one of those old school, big old cell phones. I'm looking at it. There ain't no picture on it. I'm just looking at it and going, did I dial the right number? And so I was like, well, we got to talk. And so I got home from church that night, and we talked and kind of began to pray and dream. And we shared that dream with several people. And we had some people kind of buy in early. One or two of those people are still involved to this day. We started off with 4 couples meeting in my living room, and now 16, almost 17 years later, here we are. And I'm a lot grayer and a lot balder and a lot tireder than I was then. But that's kind of the reason why, man. And we've seen God do some really cool stuff. We've seen people's lives change, marriages saved. Prodigal kids come back home, people freed from all kinds of addictions, people that literally, I vividly remember this guy, his name was James, that came and visited our church. And he walked in and he just kept looking up at the ceiling. And I was like, is there something up there? He goes, no. He goes, I just always said that if I ever walked into church, the roof would cave in. He goes, I was sure God would use that as the opportunity to like collapse the roof and kill me. I was like, man, God doesn't operate like that. And I think, man, that's been the biggest thing that our church, that God's given us the privilege to pastor, has been about, is breaking the misconception that exists in the Bible Belt that God is somehow this holy principle that's just waiting to beat people up. And instead, that, getting people to understand that he's a loving God, and yeah, he has expectations and he does want to change our lives, but he does that with love and with grace and with mercy, and he doesn't usually start with a stick, so that's that for me, that's kind of the story. And man, there's so much that goes along with that. That's how we got started, man. So like I say, blame Langford. I blame Langford.
Yeah,
so.
I would too. What are some key things you did in the beginning, thinking maybe the first, man, what's the infancy of a church start? First 2 months to 10 years?
It's usually, it's considered the first 2 years.
2 years. So what are some key things in the beginning that contributed to the success of the church?
Nothing.
Failures.
Man, in all seriousness, the biggest things that we did were made huge mistakes and learn from them. One of the things I would say is, if that's really truthfully something you feel like God's leading you to do, or entering into any new enterprise, don't let anybody rush your timetable. The biggest mistake we made is I think we kicked about a year early. Literally, I had pressures from 2 or 3 different sides, including a guy who was initially part of our plant group, and that was a mistake. The real truth of the matter is if you're going to do something, have it be successful, you need to do as much on the runway before you actually launch, or you'll wind up doing what we do, which is we've just been building the daggum plane while we've been flying it. I think other big things, though, things that we did that were right. We had a really clear vision that we didn't want to deviate from. We knew what we felt like God, and we had what we felt like God wanted us to do with the church. We had a lot of consensus around that, and that's so important, whether you're starting a church or a business, or entering into any new endeavor that involves more than one person. Is everybody's got to be moving the same direction, and that's hard to build that kind of consensus. That takes a lot of time, and you've got to restate that vision over and over and over again. And about the time you're getting bored of saying it, this is so cliche, I've read this in so many different business books and leadership books, but it's so true. About the time you're getting bored of saying it, it's about the time people are beginning to figure it out, and that can take a while. And so restating that over and over again. And the other thing was, we really built in some core principles, some of which have endured to this day. 16 years later, the two of the biggest ones for us have been, number one, the centrality of Jesus. We were never going to have a church that was all about perpetuating the church for itself. We exist for the purpose of sharing about Jesus, the good news of the gospel. And so that has been a founding principle that has never left. It's been a part of every vision statement, mission statement, goal, et cetera, that we've ever had. And the other big one has been family. We've really are very much a family focused church. We think the family is central to the success of a church. We really want to work on building good, strong families. And so having those kind of key rock solid principles, because the truth of the matter is, when you start something new, it's going to blow up, man. It's going to get set on fire. You've seen this with the Pearl House. We've seen this with churches, ministries, businesses. Something's going to explode. And if you don't have a set of principles to lean back to and be like, this is the reason why we exist, you're just going to run around fighting fire after fire after fire. And sometimes you got to let things burn. Just got to let things burn. And that's hard, because it may be something you feel like is important or essential. But the truth of the matter is, if it makes you compromise on the things that you say are key or core, it deserves to burn. And I think sometimes God allows that to happen to us to keep us on the mission that we're supposed to be on. So that's a few things, man. We learn more from failure than anything else.
Sure. You said something really good at the beginning, kind of learning how to, taking care of things on the runway instead of building the airplane after it gets in the air. And one thing that made me think about, as you're talking about putting out fires and focusing on versus focusing on the vision. A church exists obviously to fulfill a mission, and churches often just get bogged down in working on themselves and infighting and things like that. So how do you balance keeping focused on the mission of your church versus just dealing with stuff inside the walls, dealing with the fires?
I think there's a couple of things. One, you need to choose the people you empower as leaders well. They need to be people who are on the same page. But then you need to empower them. They need to be released to be able to do ministry, and they need to feel like they have ownership inside of it. And we're still learning how to do that 16 years in. But I think one of the biggest and most important things for us in doing and accomplishing what you're talking about is when we moved from being a kind of a single focal point church where everything kind of revolved around me and my ability to lead, to an elder-led congregation, which is what we'd always wanted to be. But I had some internal resistance from a couple of folks that, and this is very early days, this is back before the name of the church changed and everything else, who were really good people. And they were, I love them to death. They're still friends to this day, but they wanted that centralized control, and they didn't trust really well. And I had to make a decision because the church was floundering. And it ultimately came down to, if I said it at that point in time, it was going to do it. And the best thing I ever did was to say, we are going to install additional leadership that has equal authority. And I want you to be a part of that leadership. If you're not willing to be a part of that leadership and share authority and responsibility to these other people, then you're gonna get left behind. And that was a hard conversation, but man, we brought the guy ultimately decided that was not something he could do, and he ultimately wound up leaving, which was tough. But we brought in three other guys that are inside of the church. I recruited five, three agreed to serve, and they became our very first elder council. And I'll say their names. I mean, their names are Ron Duke, Stephen Gray, and my good friend who's gone on to be with the Lord, Big Chris Perrine. And those guys, along with myself, were the very first elder council for what was then Journey Fellowship and now is West Metro Community Church. And two of those guys, Ron and Stephen, still serve, and they serve incredibly well, and they're incredible blessings. But they helped right the ship. That was the hardest thing to do, Steve, was to release that control. And I think we even talked about that some on one of our accountability retreats about how hard that was. But man, it could not revolve just around me anymore, because I wasn't able to be with everybody and get that vision out. And so those guys were able to help do that. And then they were able to kind of help fix and write things internally to make things run, in much, much better fashion. And so, empowering them to use their skills and their talents, because they all had different skills and talents than I had. Man, it was the best thing ever. I slept so good. After that first meeting, I went to bed. We met at my house around my kitchen table. I remember it vividly. And I just laid everything out, and it was a mess. Finances were a mess. Church was disorganized, all this stuff. And they all looked at me and they were like, okay, we can fix this. And I'm like, you can? Well, yeah, I know how to do this. I know how to do this. Crud, what have I been doing for 2 years? So it was huge, man. Got done, went and told Amanda, I'm going to bed. And I slept like a baby that night for probably the first time in 6 months. It was incredible.
Being surrounded by leaders who bring solutions and don't just put highlighter ink on problems, are so refreshing to have. When you don't have that, when you have disheartening things happen, when life happens, like having to bury your friend Big Chris and all kinds of disheartening things happen in church, and also just the rigors of church work and run an organization can definitely lead to burnout. Has burnout been something you've experienced, and how'd you deal with it?
Oh man, I mean, most definitely, brother. I mean, not just burnout, but literally running almost to the edge of losing my faith. I went through a horrible crisis of faith about 6 or 7 years in to planning the church. And I mean, it was brutal. You and Loke and Ryan Young were a part of helping me kind of walk through that season of time. Um, but man, I mean, I can really only talk about this from a Christian perspective, and not from a pastoral perspective, but just as somebody who's a follower of Jesus, because I think that the key to overcoming burnout is building in habits of discipline every single day that allow you to have room to breathe and feel and release control of things, to the God of the universe who's got it all on lock. So for me, the combat for burnout starts with my daily. I have a daily time with the Lord that it starts super early. I mean, 5:15 in the morning, my alarm goes off, and I've got everything laid out. I've actually talked to my church about this last Sunday on Valentine's Day, about how you need to have a place, kind of like an appointment with God. And during that time, man, I pray. I read. I've got a reading scripture deal that I do with my accountability partners. I'm working through a devotional this year called Hearing God by Dallas Willard. That's just powerful. I practice scripture memory. I work through probably between 5 and 7 scriptures a day, reviewing them or adding new ones. I journal every day. So those are things, those are just daily spiritual practices. The second thing I would say is you've got to cultivate a habit, a lifestyle of health, man. Around that time, I was going through that crisis of faith and dealing with all the stuff I was dealing with. I was in the worst physical condition I'd ever been, bro. I was 215 pounds. I was a slab of meat. It's basically what I was. I was made up of Dr. Pepper, Buffalo Wild Wings, and candy, or ding dongs or whatever. I mean, I was not taking good care of my body. My blood pressure was stroke level. And so what I had to do was get healthy. I had to give up a whole bunch of stuff. Start eating super healthy, lower my calorie intake, start to exercise, cut out all kinds of stuff. And I continue that to this day. I'm 45 pounds down and somewhere between 45 and 50 pounds down from where I was then. And I will never go back. And so that health, putting that practice in. The other thing is, man, about exercise, about eating right, is it keeps your mind clear. I mean, it really does. It helps you be able to focus and kind of have that time. The other thing then probably the third thing I would say, the grind of starting anything new, particularly starting a church, you have to have a time of Sabbath, a time of quiet, a time to stop. And I learned that in the midst of that faith crisis on a mountainside in Colorado. My wife and I went up there with our kids, got away, and every morning while they slept, because they sleep, I get up early, they all sleep, I would hike up the mountain, quarter of a mile, and set up a chair and sit where I could read and pray and watch the sunrise. And man, it was healing. And I remember leaving that week and being like, Lord, I need this. Like, I don't want to leave the mountains. I don't want to leave Colorado because I don't want to leave this time. And it's like God almost audibly spoke to me and said, you got time, you're just wasting it. And so I got home, and what I started was this practice. I'm up early, even on the weekends. And so Saturday mornings, I would get up and go sit in my chair and watch Netflix, for 3 hours before anybody got up. And what I started doing instead was I would go out on my back patio and sit and read and drink coffee and pray and listen to music, and it was just kind of my time. It's just that time that you need. And if you don't have that personal Sabbath, you will burn out. You have to stop at some point in time. There's this amazing book. I don't remember the author's name, but I'll never forget the title. It's called The Rest of God. And if you're somebody who's struggling with burnout or struggling with building margin in your life, I highly recommend you pick up that book and read it and then put it into practice. It came into my life about a year before this burnout and crisis came in, and I went back to it. It was instrumental in helping me walk through it.
That's good. That's good stuff. We'll put that book in the links down below too.
Cool.
I've
Good.
read that book as well. It's really good. Hey, Ryan, how can people find you and find your church?
I'm on the Facebooks, but I don't do it very much. But you can give me facebook.com/Ryan.abs. All you're really going to find on there is links to our church web stuff and some pictures of my kids periodically, because I don't really do the Facebook thing. I'm on Twitter. That's my jam. That's my social media choice. It's at Abs on Journey, ABSONJOURNEY. And then my church is West Metro Community Church. You can find us at www.westmetro.org. You can also find us on Facebook at West Metro Community Church. You can find us on YouTube, West Metro Community Church. We stream all of our stuff. I got a rock solid creative team. Shout out Kelly Duke and Jeremy Coleman. They do a fantastic job, along with Ron Duke and some of our other folks, of maintaining all of our social media and all of our tech. It looks stellar. So you can find us out there like that. And man, welcome you to come check us out. We got people watching. You never believe this, Steve. We got people watching us all the way from Ghana, man.
Wow.
It's crazy. I know. I got a following in Ghana. Can't build one in Yukon, but I can build one in Winnipeg.
You got to find your people.
I don't know what's up with that. So, but yeah, man, that's where you can find us and check us out. And like I say, if you hit me up at any of those places, always happy to dialogue and hit you back in the DMs. And then if you want to email me, Lord, who does that anymore? It's Ryan@westmetro.org.
Cool. Well, thanks for joining us today, Ryan. And Ryan is Pete and his family and his church, good people, food bank, lots of good stuff going on there with Ryan. So thanks for joining us today, and thanks for being with us on Make a Difference Monday, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to Make a Difference Monday. If you would like to learn more about how you can make a difference, visit thepearlhouse.org.